You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, the 22nd of April. Something evil this way comes. One child too many. BBC polls downplay potential Romanian-Bulgarian migration. UKIP benefits from Tory gay marriage fanaticism. Belgium, young Muslims don't feel accepted. Italy, crisis could kill 250,000 businesses, says Confirmatio. Good news from Slovenia, halal salami pork free. City of Boston gave subsidy to bombing suspect's radical mosque. FBI hunting 12-strong terrorist sleeper cell linked to Sayanath brothers. Syria, poor Syria. Thought for the day, a roundup of the weekend, plus a headache, I say. And finally, Operation Splat and Ooch. UK news. Something evil this way comes. In an opposing editorial published in the Digital Journal by independent journalist Alexander Barron on the massive and ongoing investigation into alleged sex crimes against mostly media people over the weekend, the question is raised as to what is really going on here. He questions the motives behind the Jimmy Savile investigation, the massive police inquiry known as Operation U-Tree initiated in its wake, and the resulting allegations of rape and sexual misconduct against well-known and less well-known faces in the media and arts. From Gary Glitter and Max Clifford, through Michael Lavelle and Andrew Lancel, both of Coronation Street fame, to veteran BBC broadcaster Stuart Hall, and finally the latest is the UK's favourite Australian Rolf Harris. He then asks how many sexual predators can we really believe were operating at the Chetton School for Music, where Michael Brewer and his wife were convicted of historic indecent assaults on a woman who committed suicide before the guilty verdicts were returned at their trial, and the arrest of Wen Zhu Li, a professor of music who had taught at the same institution and was arrested on suspicion of rape. Barron then mentions some of the very real and shocking sex crimes proven in the UK of late, including by paedophile gangs operating in Rochdale, something that was hushed up largely because of the ethnic origins of the perpetrators. Barron asserts allegations of historic sexual assault are by and large crimes for which there is and very often can be no independent corroboration, and should be treated with unreserved suspicion unless there are compelling reasons for them not to be. He then discusses the Cleveland, Orkney, McMartin and Salem cases to support his assertion and states, the alleged historic sex crimes currently being investigated do not fall into that category, i.e. compelling reasons for them not to be treated with unreserved suspicion. His most salient points: the current investigations are not evidence-led but trawls. When people are invited to come forward and make allegations, they have a tendency to do just that, especially when they will be guaranteed anonymity and the prospect of cash payouts or the chance of selling their stories to a Sunday tabloid for a 5-figure sum. World at 8 asks, what stories are not making the front page or gaining the publicity that they should? One child too many. Sonia Poulton, writing for The Express, describes the first national child abuse tracker designed to protect the estimated 500,000 youngsters being abused in their homes and not under the care of a local authority. Sonia quoted Lisa Harker, who has co-authored the report accompanying the launch of the initiative, as saying, as a nation we spend more than £6 billion every year on social services for children and families. We need to know if our efforts are working. In a related story where Lisa Harker of the NSPCC said more than 500,000 children are abused or neglected at home each year, but just 1 in 9 are protected by local authorities. But the hidden extent of child abuse and neglect revealed in this report is a national scandal. We need to shift policy across the UK towards early intervention and set a new course that can stop cruelty blighting so many children's lives. She is essentially calling for more children to be taken into care and earlier. Sonia in the latest piece says of the NSPCC's and social services efforts, they are not working and goes on to detail her investigations into a system that is not only failing to protect children but is making them more vulnerable. Each year more than 100,000 children go missing in the UK, about 20,000 from care institutions. Majority found alive within days, about 1/3 never return. Given new identities, some are trafficked internationally and sold into varying forms of slavery. Others are sold across the UK for similar obscenities. Others are murdered. About 65,000 children in the care system, more than at any other time over the past 30 years. 20 random councils contacted to request a list of children missing from care homes. 2 councils provided figures. Others had no idea. The NSPCC says abused children need early intervention and it recommends more support for parent and child services. Commenting on this, a Department for Education spokeswoman said, "We agree that we need to intervene early to help children. Where children are suffering abuse, they should be taken into care more quickly. The state as a parent is the last option we should consider. Until we can guarantee that children are safer in care, we must first ensure we have done everything we can to keep them in the home." In an earlier news report, fears over missing persons changes on childcare experts have raised concerns over plans to stop police being called out to around 1/3 of missing persons cases. The Express states, "Police deal with around 327,000 reports of missing people each year, the equivalent of around 900 a day, 2/3 of which involve children, and that there is often a link between a child frequently going missing and falling prey to sexual abuse." World Date says 2/3 of 327,000 is more than 200,000 children who go missing rather than the 100,000 Sonia most recently quoted. Whatever the real number, it is and will remain one child too many. BBC polls downplay potential Romanian-Bulgarian migration. European Union restrictions on Romanians and Bulgarians working expires at the end of 2013. The BBC claims that work restrictions expiring later this year for migrants from Romania and Bulgaria has had little impact on the numbers planning to move to the UK or wider EU. BBC surveys, both of more than 1,000 people in each country, suggest most would move only with a firm work offer. The BBC says, "Some in the UK have voiced fears that ending restrictions will trigger a huge influx of Romanian and Bulgarian immigrants seeking work, as happened in 2004. The UK allowed people from the European Union accession states including Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic to work freely. Many of the people who came to the UK from Poland and other Eastern European countries did so without a job awaiting them. However, the results of a Newsnight survey suggest that, for now at least, most Romanians and Bulgarians would only come to the UK with a firm offer of work." World Date says, "Come on, pull the other one, leg that is. I believe that one about as much as I believe the moon is made of Swiss cheese or the earth is flat and supported by 4 turtles." UKIP benefits from Tory gay marriage fanaticism. Conservative Party finances are reeling with the revelation that at least 5 key Tory donors have defected to UKIP over Prime Minister David Cameron's nonsensical obsession with gay politics. Edmund Costello, formerly chair of the Somerton and Frome Constituency Conservative Association, said, "David Cameron and a group of colleagues have utterly lost touch with the grassroots of the Conservative Party, the majority of whom are outraged by this attack on natural and historic family values. Outrage is one thing, money is essential, and the Conservatives are losing key financial backers at an alarming rate. A number of Conservative donors who once paid $50,000 a year to dine with David Cameron and cabinet ministers as members of the Leaders Group have defected to UKIP." World Date says, "Very commendable, but they're backing the same horse and Farage will welcome money from anyone. UKIP is a chameleon, or rather a very changeable and malleable horse of the same white as shade of pale, whose rider was death." European news. Belgium. Young Muslims don't feel accepted. A survey of several hundred young Muslims was found that many don't feel accepted by Belgian society. The survey was carried out by the daily Gazette van Antwerpen, found just 30% of the Muslim youngsters questioned feel that they are accepted by Flemish society. Although 93% of these questioned are Belgian nationals, 42% consider themselves to be foreigners. Despite the efforts made by the government in the field of integration and anti-discrimination policy, the overwhelming majority of the youngsters still feel that they are not accepted by society at large. World Today says, good. Perhaps then they'll make their way out of Europe. I'm surprised, as Belgium is fast becoming an Islamic stronghold in Europe, but of course this means that they do not consider they have any loyalty to their host country, which could work against the Belgians. Italy, crisis could kill 250,000 businesses, says Confommercio. Almost 4 in 10 Italian families fear they won't have the money to pay their mortgage, while at the same time 250,000 companies are at risk of shutting their doors. Such are some of the results of the ongoing economic crisis in Europe that has hit the recession-plagued Italy very hard. Carlo Sangalli, president of the Confommercio, said Thursday. Making matters worse, 11 million Italian households have been forced to slash spending and are frightened they won't be able to pay Italy's rising taxes. They are especially worried about a hike in the VAT scheduled for July and are tightening their spending accordingly, he said. Good news from Slovenia. Halal salami pork free. Slovenia's National Veterinary Institute has cleared a local food producer, TMI's Kosaki, of accusations that its halal-labelled salami contained pork, as Swedish authorities had claimed, and the food producers behind the sausages claimed innocence too. World Today says, I would think it's obvious even to the Swedes, as Muslims don't even touch pigs, let alone slaughter them in a halal fashion. Besides, who cares about the people concerned? What about the poor animals involved? World News. City of Boston gave subsidy to bombing suspect's radical mosque. Suspected Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev attended a Massachusetts mosque that made a controversial deal with the Boston City Agency that allowed it to buy land at a lower than market price in exchange for various token services to the Boston community, despite the mosque's links to some radical anti-American figures. The Boston Redevelopment Authority, which is the city's municipal planning agency and which is comprised of mayoral appointees, conveyed the land for the ISB's purchase in 2000 at more than $400,000. However, the City of Boston only charged ISB $175,000 for the land, with an agreement that the ISB perform other services for the city to make up the $225,000 remainder. The deal was later described in media coverage as an apparent financial handout and a possible government subsidy from the City of Boston to the ISB. The ISB has raised concerns in the past for its ties to radical figures in the Muslim world. Now the 19-year-old Tsarnaev can be included amongst its glittering luminaries that includes British journalist Victoria Britton, who has criticised the United States and United Kingdom for waging a war against Islam in its anti-terrorism efforts. Islamic cleric Yusuf Abdullah al-Qadari, who said in a 1995 speech that Islam would conquer America and conquer Europe, and reportedly appeared on an IRS forms as one of the ISB's trustees. ISB trustee Walid Fatahi, who wrote that Jews would be punished for their oppression, murder and rape of the worshippers of Allah, helped broker the ISB's deal with the Boston Redevelopment Authority. World Date comments, of course. The US are just as guilty of encouraging terrorism in its midst as we are in the UK. It seems to be a game of who can roll over the best and display their soft bellies for the butchers. When will these people wake up? FBI hunting 12-strong terrorist sleeper cell linked to Tsarnaev brothers. The FBI was last night hunting a 12-strong terrorist sleeper cell linked to the Boston Marathon bomb brothers. Police believe Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev were specially trained to carry out the devastating attack. More than 1,000 FBI agents were last night working to track down the cell and arrested a man and 2 women 60 miles from Boston in the hours before Dzhokhar's dramatic capture after a bloody shootout on Friday. A source close to the investigation said, "We have no doubt the brothers were not acting alone. The devices used to detonate the 2 bombs were highly sophisticated and not the kind of thing people learn from Google." Syria, poor Syria. The headlines say it all. From the Washington Post we have Kerry, US will expedite new aid to Syrian opposition. US vows to double non-lethal aid to Syrian rebels as backers reach accord. Britain, France claim evidence that Syria used chemical weapons. Fox News gives us US to provide Syrian rebels with $123 million more in aid. And finally, Newser provides the icing on the cake. 200 US troops headed to Jordan, and it's a big deal. Why? Because as Newser.com says, the Los Angeles Times pulls no punches in its explanation. The move marks the first deployment that Pentagon officials explicitly described as a possible step towards direct military involvement in Syria. The Washington Post is a bit more tentative in its reporting, calling the move indicative of a higher level of preparation for a possible expanded US military role. A large-scale deployment could embroil the US in a significant, lengthy and uncertain military commitment, Hagel noted. World at 8 comments, I agree, poor old Syria. It's a lesson hard learnt. Dead men tell no tales. And if Assad's regime had been more Marxist, these so-called democratic jihadists would have been dead and the world no better informed. Therein lies a lesson. Thought for the day, roundup of the weekend and a headache, I say. I was trawling through the weekend papers, or at least the Mail, my woman-sized brain can just about accommodate that particular national journal, and realised that we are all subject to a massive amount of disinformation, or in other words cover-ups, under the form of giving us information which is limited and biased, to say the least. Now, not all people in this country of ours are subjected to this for many and varying reasons. First of all, you have to be able to read and understand English, which blots out an entire generation and indeed many races from being propagandised. Some people will not read certain papers on principle, although like our three main political parties, they're all really the same wolf in sheep's clothing. On a lighter side, I skirted, like it, the women's mags and came to the conclusion that as I couldn't afford £200 for a skimpy top, £500 for a cloth printed bag, or around £400 for a rather fetching hot pants suit, this section was not for me. I did however fancy the rather nice day dress for £1,874. Let no one tell you that winning the lottery would make no difference to me. Watch this space, if only. By the time I came to the article that we as a nation are indulging in extramarital affairs on a large scale, I was bent double laughing. Now my friends, if I find it hard to scamper around and appear seductive to my third hubby of nearly 20 years, do you honestly think I'm going to try an extramarital affair? Just imagine all that hard work with a total stranger. No, a good book and a bottle of wine and a headache, I say. Then we had the cover featuring Tracy Amin, and words do fail me when an unmade-up bed and dirty knickers passes for art. And she doesn't give up, does she? Well, you have to hand it to her for sheer chutzpah in conning the liberal lovies, don't you? Then we come to the non-news, the Boston bombings, which apparently were a possible rehearsal for the London Marathon or not, but it gave the London effort more publicity than it's had for years. With all the wannabes holding a minute's silence, I expected tears of gratitude that a bomb didn't go off and blast them all off the face of the earth, because that's what they're all thinking to the man or woman, better them than I, it's human nature, matey. The ridiculous mantra of why didn't the FBI stop the Boston bombers before they struck, well, the answer could be that they were not striding around for years before this incident, wearing stripy flowing garments and wearing suicide bomber vests, or carrying large black things with lit fuses. In short, they had done what we in the UK and the States promote Muslims to do, seemingly to integrate. And that is the danger of misinformation. The sheer stupidity of the media in giving out or making us ask the wrong questions. Don't ask why this fragmented family were allowed into the States in the first place, but do ask why the American system allowed it to happen. Blame shifting. The media are experts at it. I didn't realise that the States had some sort of history with Chechnya, perhaps preferring an Islamic offshoot to a Russian one. But then we and they allow all manner of Russians into our countries, possibly unchecked and unmonitored. Certainly health-wise, this is not good. My stepdaughter in New York got TB from looking after Russian teenagers in a summer camp for her trouble. Why do the West pander to the East so much? Because it's not widely broadcast that many of these European peoples are riddled with TB and worse. Why do you think they come here especially for the free healthcare? The US they go to because their villages and towns have already settled in Little Russia. Having read that Kate will live with her mum after the child is born was of little interest. I view the Middletons with distaste, I'm afraid. Very boring trying to be something else all the time. Poor old Rolf Harris and the sex abuse scandal. Oh boys. Oh boy, if they paid as much attention to the real sexual abuse going on under their noses in the form of the Muslims and their ever-ramping grooming evils, we wouldn't have had thousands of young girls abducted and raped over many years up north. But no, some old white guys had what was in many cases a crafty feel-up in what seems thousands of years ago, and whoopee, they're arresting them left, right and centre. But mainly, if you notice, they're mainly of the right. And shock of shock, most of these stories abound on Twitter, of course. There was an article on Kaiser Merkel. They wouldn't do a Hitler version, would they? And I'd like to know the ethnicity of the staff who didn't wash their hands at the university hospital staffs so that some of the prem babies died. I would view that as rather important. The terrifyingly modern family is a punch in the snoot for the white working class in action. They all look like an advert for interbreeding from the mountains of West by God, Virginia, who had no option but to sleep with their sisters and cousins because of the lack of new blood. But the answer is, in their case and others like them, discipline, which the papers ignore. Take away the parents and who will teach these kids and others like them to butt out? Their neighbours are terrified. The police, whilst unable to do anything themselves, will stop anyone else doing it. Their teachers are petrified and these brats get away with murder. Nothing short of public floggings and take away their benefits would work. Call me tough, but a humanist I ain't. At least not when this is the result of the namby-pamby understanding why brigade. Then we come to the best of the lot. The yellow racist comes through the pages like a sledgehammer. Now before I give vent on this one, there was a comment on YouTube about my comments on one of my thoughts on oil slicks. Now to be honest, I'm not a racist, but I am a tribalist. And peoples from the sub-Saharan continent are not my tribe. The commentator said I obviously despised black people and foreigners. Well, he catches on quick, doesn't he? Actually, the truth is that I do not despise anyone, but I don't like the fact there are so many different and multi-ethnic peoples in our country now. And yes, I would like to see a goodly proportion of them go back to their own countries voluntarily. I would also like to be able to go to a foreign country and see the people over there with their culture rather than see it on any street corner in my country. Now that's fair, isn't it? So actually my message is listen before you comment. If matey didn't like that one, he'll hate this one. Race row as Tory town tells Superhead we don't want your inner city pupils here. Good on them, I wouldn't want them either. This lovely old building has been brought from the proceeds of Duran's leisure and student accommodation business to buy St Cuthman's School, a Grade 2 listed building, for $3.4 million in 2010. They want to open it as a boarding school for pupils aged 13 to 19. Now Duran's operate in Brixton, and with all the funding they probably get from the government and various ethnic charities, the intake is mainly black and Asian. The picture of Michael Gove on a visit to a South London school shows him sitting with younger pupils of around 11 years. Now larger black and Asian kids of teenage years are already set in their ways, and these ways will be the Brixton ways: knives, gangs or Islamic fundamentalism. Remember, they start young, these kids. Apart from the fact that this old listed building will be ruined, the environment will be ruined, the local inhabitants may as well sell up now, and the papers are having a field day of feeling good. Duran say they'll bus in the pupils for 5 days a week, but if it's to be a boarding school that's ridiculous, as boarders stay all term time, don't they? I may be out on a limb here, but I don't believe that listed buildings bought under very suspicious circumstances should be given over to teenagers from that environment, because it's been proved that when they're taken from their own habitat, they proceed to ruin the new one, every time. That age group are dangerous in Brixton, and it's too late to remedy years of subculture. The one point that does surprise me is that it wasn't bought by a Saudi or Qatari for a sodding Islamic school and had a prayer tower erected on the beautiful rooftop. By the way, have you noticed even in the country there are no more bells on Sundays? But permission is being given for prayer tower recordings to be aired on Fridays in certain towns. Now you tell me why the papers don't report on that one instead of a band of ethnics being bussed in instead of being shipped out. A leading black conservative, Kwasi Kwarteng, urged locals to drop their opposition. Well, I don't, my friends. Up your opposition and game plan. To be really called racist, you might as well be hung for a sheep as for a lamb. I'm sick and tired of being badgered in my own home through the papers and the media on the Black Plague. I'm sick of the Lawrence debacle. I'm sick of seeing from the Brit TV plays and shows mixed marriages or partnerships, black families always portrayed as having wonderful houses, professions and loving parents, bad white guys and even worse white girls. I'm also sick of the Muslims jumping on the bandwagon as the only people with the gripe against life, and of course theirs is so much more justified than anyone else's. In short, sick of misinformation, not because it aggravates me, but because it steers questions and debate away from the real causes which will have to be faced in the future and for which we as a people will not be prepared. One thing which has never to my knowledge been publicised in the UK papers is the building of a wonderful ship with a prow made out of the remains of the steel from the World Trade Center attacks. The USS New York was built with 24,000 tonnes of scrap steel from the World Trade Center. It is fifth in the new class of warships designed for missions that include special operations against terrorists. It will carry a crew of 360 sailors and 700 combat-ready Marines to be delivered ashore by helicopters and assault craft. When the steel was melted down in a foundry in Amite, Louisiana, September the 9th, 2003, to cast the ship's bow section, those big rough steel workers treated it with total reverence, recalled Navy Captain Kevin Wensing, who was there. It was a spiritual moment for everybody. Junior Chavers, foundry operations manager, said, "It had a big meaning to it for all of us," he said. "They knocked us down, they can't keep us down. We're going to be back." The ship's motto, never forget. Now that is what I call a deed well done. What have our papers done with that news? Nothing. It would offend certain communities that we are obviously busy appeasing. For what? I can't think. They all come from hellholes they have created in the name of their religions or subcultures. Why should we bend like a reed in the wind? But then that is the real result of positive misinformation, negative information, and the Marxist cult of diminishing a people and a nation. Take away their religion, take away their youth, take away their industries, take away their self-respect, take away their future, take away their history. Bring in immigrants to outbreed them or kill them with plagues, and label the entire monstrosity progress, diversity and multiculturalism. Label the people who stand against it racists or liars, and you have the last 50 years in Britain. Only the British National Party, warts and all, can bring some sanity or at least another point of view to the table. Millions agree with our manifesto, but too few show its support. Now is the time to shove your head above the parapet for what is, in truth, your country, your land and your future. Or a headache, I say. And finally, Operation Splatnooch. Reported by the Telegraph, consultant surgeon Mr Jared Homer and consultant anaesthetist Dr Cameron Abbas were seen squaring up to each other in a corridor at Manchester Royal Infirmary, according to the Manchester Evening News. A nurse intervened in a bid to split them up but ended up accidentally knocking out one of the doctor's teeth. It's understood Dr Abbas from Didsbury and Mr Homer from Moberley in Cheshire have been asked to stay at home while hospital chiefs investigate the incident. Spokeswoman for Central Manchester University Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, which manages the MRI, said, "This incident is the subject of an internal investigation and we are unable to comment further while this is underway." It is understood the incident took place around 2 to 3 weeks ago. It is believed to have started off as a minor row over patients not being brought down to theatre at the right times. It escalated into a huge argument and ended with the pair going toe to toe. It's not clear which doctor lost a tooth during the incident. On one side we have Dr Abbas, specialising in anaesthetising obese people, an area of medicine called bariatric anaesthesia, and gives lectures to the Society for Obesity and Bariatric Anaesthesia in London and Manchester. He declined to comment at his home in Manchester. On the other side we have Mr Homer, who was appointed as a consultant ear, nose and throat surgeon at the Manchester Royal Infirmary and the Christie Hospital in 2002. He has special expertise in head, neck cancer and thyroid surgery, as well as surgery for snoring and rhinoplasty, or nose jobs. He is also director of the Manchester Ear, Nose and Throat Clinic, a private business whose website says he has performed more than 700 cosmetic rhinoplasties, and is honorary laryngologist to the Royal Northern College of Music. Mr Homer could not be reached for a comment. However, this presenter says there's no record of when Dr Abbas started consulting at the Royal Infirmary. However, he does have a website, and one of the 2 comments reads thus: "Not really much point in having a reviewing facility if your review gets removed if it's deemed unsatisfactory. I had a bad experience being anaesthetised by Dr Abbas, but obviously if it's not a fantastic review it will be removed again." Perhaps there was a misunderstanding along the lines of language, and it would be interesting to know who lost their tooth to whom. Not good for patients though, scalpels at dawn. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I wish you all a very good night. To CNF brothers. Syria, poor Syria. Thought for the day, a roundup of the weekend, plus a headache, I say. And finally, Operation Splat and Ooch. UK News. Something evil this way comes. In an opposing editorial published in the Digital Journal by independent journalist Alexander Barron on the massive and ongoing investigation into alleged sex crimes against mostly media people over the weekend, the question is raised as to what is really going on here. He questions the motives behind the Jimmy Savile investigation, the massive police inquiry known as Operation U-Tree initiated in its wake, and the resulting allegations of rape and sexual misconduct against well-known and less well-known faces in the media and arts. From Gary Glitter and Max Clifford, through Michael Lavelle and Andrew Lancel, both of Coronation Street fame, to veteran BBC broadcaster Stuart Hall, and finally the latest is the UK's favourite Australian Rolf into that category, i.e. compelling reasons for them not to be treated with unreserved suspicion. His most salient points: the current investigations are not evidence-led but trawls. When people are invited to come forward and make allegations, they have a tendency to do just that, especially when they will be guaranteed anonymity and the prospect of cash payouts or the chance of selling their stories to a Sunday tabloid for a 5-figure sum. World at 8 asks, what stories are not making the front page or gaining the publicity that they should? One child too many. Sonia Poulton, writing for The Express, describes the first national child abuse tracker designed to protect the estimated 500,000 youngsters being abused in their homes and not under the care of a local authority. Sonia quoted Lisa Harker, who has co-authored the report accompanying the launch of the initiative, as saying, "As a nation we spend more than £6 billion every year."
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the #1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, the 22nd of April. Something evil this way comes. One child too many. BBC polls downplay potential Romanian Bulgarian migration. UKIP benefits from Tory gay marriage fanaticism. Belgium, young Muslims don't feel accepted. Italy, crisis could kill 250,000 businesses, says Confirmatio. Good news from Slovenia, halal salami pork free. City of Boston gave subsidy to bombing suspect's radical mosque. FBI hunting 12-strong terrorist sleeper cell linked on social services for children and families. We need to know if our efforts are working. In a related story where Lisa Harker of the NSPCC said more than 500,000 children are abused or neglected at home each year, but just 1 in 9 are protected by local authorities. But the hidden extent of child abuse and neglect revealed in this report is a national scandal. We need to shift policy across the UK towards early intervention and set a new course that can stop cruelty blighting so many children's lives. She is essentially calling for more children to be taken into care and earlier. Sonia in the latest piece says of the NSPCC's and social services efforts they are not working, and goes on to detail her investigations into a system that is not only failing to protect children but is making them more vulnerable. Each year more than 100,000 children go missing in the UK, about 20,000 from care institutions. Majority found alive within days, about 1/3 never return, given new identity. Paris. He then asks how many sexual predators can we really believe were operating at the Chetton School for Music, where Michael Brewer and his wife were convicted of historic indecent assaults on a woman who committed suicide before the guilty verdicts were returned at their trial, and the arrest of Wen-Zhu Li, a professor of music who had taught at the same institution and was arrested on suspicion of rape. Barron then mentions some of the very real and shocking sex crimes proven in the UK of late, including by paedophile gangs operating in Rochdale, something that was hushed up largely because of the ethnic origins of the perpetrators. Barron asserts allegations of historic sexual assault are by and large crimes for which there is and very often can be no independent corroboration, and should be treated with unreserved suspicion unless there are compelling reasons for them not to be. He then discusses the Cleveland, Orkney, McMartin and Salem cases to support his assertion and states, "The alleged historic sex crimes currently being investigated do not fall